It's my privilege to get to introduce our speaker this evening, Mark Hodges, who is absolutely no stranger to our congregation, will be our speaker tonight. Mark works, here's a little bit of information background. Mark works and worships with the Pleasant Valley congregation in Little Rock. He is currently the Vice President of Enterprise Sales and Client Management for Info Group Targeting Solutions. That's a mouthful. Okay, well, sounds impressive though. Mark's background is in digital marketing, and he has served clients such as Procter & Gamble, Walmart, Disney, and major broadcast and cable television companies. Mark is also an adjunct professor of marketing sales at Harding University. Mark and his wife, Tamra, the noteworthy, the famous Tamra, who is from our congregation, have two children. Ashton is 22, and she just graduated from Harding this past December. And Harrison is 18, and he'll be attending Ole Miss in the fall. Mark is also the son-in-law of our own Kurt and Reba Shaddocks. We were talking about it back there a little bit. I can't believe Ashton is that old. Of course, I can't believe my kids are that old, but Mark did mention that she's off the payroll, so that's important too. So let's have a prayer, and then I'll turn it over to Mark. Father, we thank you so much for your blessings, and we thank you so much for Mark and Tamara coming up tonight, and we just pray that you be with him as he speaks to us. Father, help each of us be attentive to what he's teaching. Help us always be in tune with your word, Father, and help it to always change us so that we can be more like Christ. Father, we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Stand by, check. How's that? Is that better, isn't it? Now you might hear something. Okay. I'm going to have to work around this podium a little bit. How's everyone doing? Oh, you sound just thrilled sick to be here. So I'm going to start off by saying thank you. I really have to say thank you to all of you for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is not laughing me out of this building when I first showed up here in 1988. But I will go ahead and tell you this. I have learned, Tamara and I are facing this new phase in our life right now called empty nesters. And let me tell you, I'm not ready for that, okay? I have learned that over the last 3 years in particular, I'm a tear bag. I cry at weddings, I cry at funerals, I cry when certain people get voted off the Bachelorette, I cry. In fact, when Harrison was graduating, the night before he graduated, I ran into Walmart, and I told Reba, she was down there with us, and I told her I got out to the car, I threw my bags in, and I just sat there, and it all hit me at once, and I just ugly cried, okay? I mean, it was wailing. If you've ever heard wailing, it was wailing. So I'm going to try and get through this thank you without wailing. I need to thank you as a community of faith, because I have, over the last, I guess August 11th, in 1990 is when I stood up there and got the greatest blessing of my life. Tamara's rethinking it over several decades, but 26 years in August. I jokingly call her my first wife, but you know, she's my only wife. But you know, I am excited and to thank you, because I know that good Christian people are the result of this tapestry of interactions and touches and lives, and many of you helped shape who she is. And so I truly appreciate it, because you, whether you know it or not, through your impact with her, you've had an impact on my family, on me, and on my kids. And your touch continues to resonate in our lives. So thank you for that. Now, I made it through that. So let me ask for a couple of volunteers. Who in here, if you don't mind raising your hand just real quickly, who in here is under the age of 25? Anyone? Okay, we got one. How about 26? 20, I tell you what, let me get you. Come on down here. How old are you? Oh, I shouldn't ask you that. That's the wrong thing to ask, isn't it? Are you under the age of 30? Anyone under the age of 30? Do you want to be in on this? No, because, you know, come on down here. You get a chance to win 2 prizes. How's that? Come on, come down here. All right. I promise I won't embarrass you too much. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do something. You can stand right there. First of all, what's your name? Dakota? I'm Mark. Nice to meet you. Okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to turn toward the screen. Okay, I'm not going to ask you to do jumping jacks or anything like that. I'm going to ask all of you not to say anything. Don't help them out, all right? Here's the game. You got a chance to win real prizes, like real prizes, okay? They have value. And I'm going to put an iconic image up on the screen. And I want you to tell me what it is. It is iconic to me. It's iconic probably to many of you in this, all of our generations in here, okay? So are you ready? No. You're not? Yes. Okay. Well, you better get ready because you need to give us a reason to laugh at you, not with you. So here we go. Are you ready? Everybody remember, don't help them out. All right. What is this image? Huh? Fallout Boys? Okay, so an album cover, right? Okay, that's a great guess. It's wrong, but I'm going to give you another shot. So this, most of you know what this is, right? You remember it, don't you? Okay, let me help you out. This was often accompanied by this sound.
So the beginning of a movie.
The beginning of a movie? No, not quite. No idea. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do, just to make it easy on you. Thank you for letting us laugh at you. I have 2 Sonic gift cards for you, okay? Don't get excited. You can probably buy a drink off one of those. But anyway, enjoy those. Thanks for playing. Go have a seat. Who remembers what this is? You remember it was a test pattern on television, right? I don't know about you, but I cannot count the number of times that I woke up on the couch late at night hearing the national anthem, seeing the little clip of the flag with the fireworks going off, and then it went to this, which is a test pattern that ran all night long. And usually, you know, the 3 networks that we had back in those days were signing off like at 10:30 or 11. I didn't count PBS as a network after 10 a.m., okay? When Sesame Street went off, it was no longer a network for me. So the Jim Lear hour, which I guess he's still doing his thing, it didn't mean anything to me. So here's what's interesting. There have been a lot of things that have changed, right? I'm going to walk you through a little bit of that. I don't know what you thought when you saw the title of this. I don't even know if you even read what the title of this was. As far as, you know, the church and technology. Some of you probably thought, oh good, finally, a talk on the church and technology. We need to do something about that. And others of you thought, finally, a talk on church and technology. We need to talk about that. It's neither one of those, all right? I'm going to talk to you real quickly as I can in the time I've got, just about change and some of the things that are going on and the impact to all of us in our daily lives. So just to illustrate this a little bit, how many of you know what the #1 rated television show in 1976-77 in that season was? Anybody have a guess? Just throw one out. What? MASH? Great guess, not quite. It had Gunsmoke? Nope. Ed Sullivan? Nope. I'm sorry, what? Mork and Mindy? Good guess. All of these are great guesses. They're all wrong, but great guesses. Here was the #1 show. It was Happy Days. You remember that? This was the season before Laverne and Shirley debuted at #1, which had never happened before. Okay, but during that series, during that year, Happy Days was the #1 rated television show with a rating of 31.5. Now, I'm not sure how many of you understand television ratings, so here's the 10-second primer on that, okay? A television rating point equals 1% of the televisions in the U.S. Make sense? So basically, 31.5% of all the TVs in the U.S. were tuned in to Happy Days. Make sense? Everybody with me? Okay, good. Everybody's awake still. I'm very excited about that because I ate pasta for dinner and I'm about to fall asleep. Okay. Anyone that want to hazard a guess what the 2014 and 15 #1 television show was? Big Bang Theory. Absolutely. That's exactly what it was. The Big Bang Theory with a 4.6 rating. In the 70s, it took a 31 rating to have a #1 show. In the 70s, if you had a 4.6 rating, you got canceled. You got stuck after 10:30 following reruns of Ironside. I mean, let's be honest. You did not survive on television if you had a 4.6 rating. Now, you're number one. Why is that? Yeah, you've got so many different ways to view, and think about it. In the 70s, there were 3 television networks. Today, the average household has 223 television networks that you can choose from. So viewership has fragmented. You're watching networks that weren't even around. You know, and occasionally I'll be flipping channels. I like turn the dial. That shows you how old I am. I should have done this, but I remember, you know, I was the remote control in my house. My dad would say, go change the channel. Okay, and I'd go over and change the channel. Well, here's the thing. Television viewership has gotten so fragmented that things have changed dramatically. I'm going to show you a commercial that you haven't seen yet, okay? I've shown this at Pleasant Valley. I've shown this to different elder retreats. I've shown it to different men's retreats. They don't let me go to the women's retreats. I've shown this to a lot of different groups. I've shown it up at Harding. Nobody has seen this, and I doubt that you have. So just pay attention and take a look and see if you think it's real.
Hey, how's it going? Let me show you something cool. Let me just pee a little. Ah, yeah, nice one. And now, without even having to cry, Mommy's gonna come in my room to change me. Ta-da! You know how I did that? I'm using Huggies Tweet Pee, the diaper that warns parents when it's time for a diaper change. Its sensor detects humidity inside the diaper and sends a tweet to my parents, wherever they are. Through an app, of course, because, you know, that's how we roll in my generation. Mommy and Daddy know when I pee, when it's time to change the diaper, and even how many diapers I'm gonna need over the following days. That can be bought and received at home with a simple click of a button. And because it prevents unnecessary changes, Mommy gets to save some money and buy me more toys. Yeah, Tweet Pee, helping Mommy organize, monitor, and buy diapers online.
I can't make this up. I really can't. You guys are never having me come back after this. How many of you believe that's real? Oh, just a few. How many of you believe it's fake? You know, it's one of the things they're going to run in the first break of Saturday Night Live. Real quickly, how many of you aren't going to raise your hand no matter what question I ask? Just out of, that's what I thought. Okay, I figured. All right, so here's the thing about that. It is real. It is in test marketing right now in Brazil. If you notice the names on the app, Davi, they were all Portuguese type names. And here's the brilliance of it, okay? The moisture indicator, that's just, you know, that's just a gimmick. The beauty of it is Huggies has figured out a way to schedule diaper deliveries to your house and you control it on your phone. You didn't know that was coming. If it goes well in Brazil this year, you're going to see it on this continent within the next 8 to 10 months. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know how Tamara and I ever raised 2 children without this, okay? You know, for me, the indicator was, well, is it hanging down to their leg yet? Okay, you know, is it at the knee? Okay, I guess it's time to change. I mean, here's the reality, folks. Things are changing dramatically, and they're impacting our lives, whether we want to realize it or not. And I'm going to talk about 2 words real quickly. One is exponential, one is linear. Most of you know what those words mean, but I'm going to kind of illustrate it in the context of what we're talking about tonight. So let me just start with, what does exponential feel like? And let's just start right here. If I told you to take 30 paces, you would go about 30 meters, right? I mean, the average stride, I'm a little shorter, so I'm a little less than a meter per step, but most people are going to travel about 30 meters if I told you to go 30 linear paces. Make sense? You're just going one after the other after the other. Everybody with me? If I told you to take 30 exponential steps, how far would you go? I'm going to hurt your head before it's over with tonight. How far do you think you would go? You would go around the world. In fact, you would go around the world 26 times if you took 30 exponential steps. Think about it. One step is 1 meter, the next step is 2 meters, the next step is 4 meters, the next step is 8, 16, 32, 64. Sound like computer memory to you? I mean, it is exponential steps. And before you know it, you've gone over 1 billion meters. And that's kind of bothersome when you think about it. When you think about the difference between linear and exponential, but let me show you what this looks like in our world. Back in the 90s, when we were first starting to raise children, I lived under this auspice of the cheapest commodity you could ever get a hold of is film, because you never wanted to be without film, right? You wanted that Kodak moment. You remember at Walmart, those of you who might recall this, they had a big photo area in Walmart. Now they've kind of relegated it to a corner and you just send your prints over via digital method and they just print it, or you print it yourself. But back then they had a 1 hour Photoshop, and you could also, if you wanted to save a little bit of coin, you could send it off and wait a few days. But they had these bins under the counter. You remember huge film bins, Kodak all the way across, different speeds of film. You could get 100 speed, 200, which was the most commonly used, 400, 1,000, which had larger pieces of silver oxide in it. I mean, it was a big, big deal. And people bought film like crazy. And we always worried when we went through airports, right? Oh, I got to stick it in the lead bag. Could you hand check that? Wouldn't work today, okay? The reality is they're just going to throw it on the conveyor belt or you ain't taking it. Well, think about that period of time. Back in the 90s, Kodak, in 1996, had a $28 billion market cap. I'm just going to show you what Exponential looks like to business. They had a $28 billion market cap. They had 140,000 employees, pretty strong. Everyone knew who Kodak was, right? In 2012, they went bankrupt with 17,000 employees. What happened? Everything went digital. Now here's the crazy thing, and I'm going to show you this guy here a little bit later. Well, he's not with me, but I'm going to show you this guy here in just a little bit. There was a gentleman by the name of Steve Sasson who in 1976 developed the first digital camera. He worked for Kodak, and he went to the Kodak executives and showed it to them. And the executive's response was, how does it sell film? It doesn't sell film. Then stick it in the closet downstairs and get back to figuring out how to sell more film. And this is what you get. Short-sighted. And this is exponential change. But let me show you what exponential really looks like in business. Also, in 2012, in April, a little company called Instagram at the time, before they got acquired by Facebook, had a $1 billion market cap with only 13 employees. And now we all use it. And that's where all of your kids and grandkids are moving now. They're in Snapchat. Facebook ain't cool anymore. I mean, it's not. Everyone knows that. The reality is Facebook is the best advertising platform, but it is totally uncool. You will not find, none of my students at Harding, none of them spend any time on Facebook at all. They did when it was vogue and cool and hip, but ever since, no offense, but ever since parents and grandparents got on Facebook, it stopped being cool. And so now they've all because you guys are posting pictures of them when they're little kids and embarrassing them. So the reality is they've all moved to Instagram, they've all moved to Snapchat, they've moved to Vine, they've moved to all of these other different types of social networks. The two big up-and-comers are Path and Peach. Don't know if you know about those, but if you're not on them, you're late. So here's the reality. Things have changed dramatically. Exponential means I can run a big business and totally put someone who's been around for decades out of business with very few people. But let's look a little further. This is, I grabbed this cover of USA Today because I just liked it back in 2013. I haven't found yet one picture that describes linear to exponential better than this. You remember Blockbuster Video? On the same day that Twitter had their IPO and they went onto the stock exchange, Blockbuster closed their doors. Now, I worked with Blockbuster for a while. They were one of my customers, and they had a strategic imperative, as they called it. They wanted in any town of any size, their target was towns that had 20,000 people and up. They wanted to have a Blockbuster within 5 minutes drive of any person in that town or city. And you recall, it was hard to get away from Blockbuster. They were about as populous as Starbucks are now. You could trip over a Starbucks wherever you go. Well, Blockbuster was everywhere. But just like Kodak, here's the reality. Kodak made a critical mistake. They forgot, they thought they were in the film industry, but they aren't. They weren't. They were in the image industry. You see the difference? Very much like the guy who used to make horseshoes who didn't realize he was in the transportation business instead of the horseshoe business. And just like Blockbuster, they needed to realize they were in the entertainment business, not the video rental business. And what's taken its place? Well, Netflix, Redbox, anything that comes to you on demand. So these are a few examples of things that make Exponential come to light, but just a few others. In 10 years, and when this was written 5 years ago, and we're on this pace, by the way, this guy wrote an article and said in 10 years it's predicted that 40% of the Fortune 500 companies will no longer exist. Now, we aren't accustomed to that, are we? Most of us who grew up in, with birthdays that start with 19, most of us did not expect a bunch of businesses going out of business if they were part of the indices of the stock exchange. But take a look at this. The average lifespan of a company listed in the S&P 500 has changed. In the 1920s, it was 67 years. On average, that company would stay around 67 years. Today, 15 years. Companies don't stay around as long anymore. And if you work with millennials, some people say that as a bad word. I don't. I've just come to understand them. Millennials they will change jobs every 6 months and not care. Whereas you and I, many of you, it started changing when I was getting out of college, but a lot of folks stayed with the same company for decades and retired from that company. My grandfather did that. He actually got a watch, okay? I'm not kidding. He actually got a watch from William R. Moore in Memphis, Tennessee, because he worked there for decades. My other grandfather was a superintendent of Earl High School for decades. He had a cafeteria named after him. I don't know that the food was good, but he had a cafeteria. But here's the reality. Now my daughter, who graduated in December, she's on her second job. And it's completely normal. And it's amazing what we run into, and it's amazing the challenge I have, and some of you have, when we interview some of these folks for jobs, because we think it costs so much to bring someone into the company, and they might leave in 6 months and never actually contribute anything. So we've gone from the days of, I've got an idea, to now, I run $1 billion company, and here are some examples. I had a little mess up with Instagram, but YouTube, Instagram, Dropbox, Uber, are these names familiar to some of you at all? Here's the reality, folks. We have people who come out of college who within 5 to 10 years, they're not expecting to have a job and support themselves. They're looking for the billion-dollar idea. And that's just how they've been trained, because they have grown up in a period of very rapid exponential change. So let's talk about what it looks like. You can't see this very well. I'm not going to stay on this one. I actually want to get to the next one. I've done some logarithmic plotting of technology growth over the years. We really are getting to something Bible related here in a few minutes if you'll keep your hands and arms in the car at all times. But this starts with electromechanical stuff, moves all the way through the integrated circuit. But let me show you this, because this is something we use in my industry to kind of calculate power of computing. In general, we say, okay, how much computing power, how many calculations per second can the average $1,000 laptop do? Okay, because that's a pretty fair number. Some people spend less, some people spend more, but we just say, on average, $1,000 laptop, how many calculations per second can that laptop do? And here's what's interesting. We've kind of plotted it out, and you probably can't see it too well, but just to give you an idea, 10 to the 8th power is the speed of an insect's brain. 10 to the 11th power is a mouse's brain. 10 to the 16th power is us. I might be 10 to the 15th, but for most of you, 10 to the 16th power is the calculations per second a human brain can do. 10 to the 26th power is the calculations per second the entirety of mankind can do. All right? Here's what you need to be aware of. In 2010, we hit a mouse's brain with a $1,000 laptop. In 2023, we expect to be to the point of the human brain. But in 2050, it's expected that when you spend $1,000 on a laptop, it's going to be able to do the same calculations per second as all of the brains on the planet. Now you just roll that one around in your head for a second. Because the reality is, it's hard for us to get our minds around that, isn't it? But think of what we do. We buy a new computer, and for the first 6 months, we're fine with it. And at about month 8, we say, man, this thing is really slowing down. I must have installed something that just messed this up. And by month 12, we're thinking, I gotta wipe this thing and start all over because it's just not working right. For some of you, it's your phones. My phone still isn't working. You know, let's set aside the typical operator error category and just say, you know, over time, as things, it's kind of like us, okay? We slow down as we put on weight, and so do electronics. Okay, it's pretty typical. But in this case, I just want you to see exponentially where we're going. So I think that this attacks 3 things. And when I think of this, I think of there are 3 things in particular that have happened with this linear to exponential growth. And here's the first one for the 3 of you taking notes. Dematerialization. Meaning, look at this picture of this guy right here. This could have been me. I had all this stuff. But the beauty of today is now all of this fits in your pocket. In fact, it fits on one device in your pocket. Dematerialization means we are taking things, materials that we used to have a lot of space to house, and we're cramming them down into one little device. That's why newspapers are folding by the dozen, because they cannot come to grips with the same device you can watch a television show on, you can also read a newspaper on, and all of this is collapsed in on itself. You have media on top of media on top of media, and then most of us have conversations with people under the age of 30, and they're doing this. How many of you go to dinner and look across at a table of people, and maybe you're that table where everybody is playing with a device and not talking? You've seen it happen. It probably happens at your house. Who knows? But dematerialization is happening. The second thing is demonetization. Money that used to be out there that companies were grabbing is no longer there, and here is why. Most of you recognize these things. For those of you who can see, it's kind of hard to see up there, but it might be an eye chart. Taxi fleets, bookstores, long distance companies, you remember that craze? You know, hey, only 2 cents per minute if it's long distance, and then you got stung if it was called intra-lata, which meant that it was inside the state in a certain boundary, and it wasn't technically long distance, it was kind of short long distance, and your local phone company would just, layer it on top of you. Anyway, bookstores, hotel chains, classifieds, well, here's what's happened. All of these have been replaced. Bookstores by the dozen. Borders Bookstore is no longer here. Walden Books, no longer here. Barnes & Noble, struggling because they've been replaced. Libraries replaced by Google. Taxi fleets being replaced almost everywhere with Uber. And let me tell you, it is hilarious. I go to New York, I go to Los Angeles, and I see the taxi companies trying to block the Uber drivers out. I took an Uber, it was like 3 weeks ago, and the guy actually called me, which is great. I just tell them where I am on an app, they follow my GPS, they come get me, I jump in, and it's kind of covert. You know, it's like a prison break every time I get out of an airport in Uber. And so I was waiting for the guy, and he called me, he said, hey, you're gonna have to come to the outside ring by the parking deck. And I was like, dude, this isn't a drug deal, I just need a ride. And I had to go meet the guy. It was kind of sketchy, but all of these companies, in New York City especially, taxis are run by the mob. I don't care what anybody tells you. Up in New York, they really are run by the mob, and they get mad because those drivers pay almost $100,000 for that taxi medallion. And now they're seeing that money start to evaporate because Uber is just taking over the rides left and right. You've seen this happen. Hotel chains being replaced by Airbnb, and they are doing a lot of on-air advertising now, where you could put your house on Airbnb and just rent it out. I'm going out of town for the weekend. Let me see if I can get somebody to stay here and make some money. That's not terrifying at all, but at any rate. The third thing Democratization. Now, this to me is the embedding of technology in our lives and affecting it. And let me just show you a couple of things real quickly, because I know I'm running out of time. How many of you are familiar with Moore's Law, other than the guys who I know are in this business, okay? Which basically, this guy came up with Moore's Law. He was one of the heads of Intel for years, and I'm going to summarize it very simply. He basically said computing power will double in speed every 18 months on average, okay? And it has. It continues to do so. In fact, Intel had to try and rewrite Moore's Law because they're having trouble getting that much power on silicon chips right now. But democratization is the embedding of this in our lives, which it's happened to you. Most of the cars you're driving are controlled by computers. I remember when they talked about having Windows running cars, and it terrified me because the way to fix a problem with Windows is to reboot. What am I going to do if the brakes start working? Oh, let me reboot, turn it off and turn it back on. Well, here are some examples of technologies that are writing Moore's Law. And I'm not going to go through all of these. Some of you know what these are, some of you don't care. But the reality is all of these things are going to have an impact on you. And I'll talk a little bit more about one or two of these here in a second, but there was this great PR stunt done by IBM, probably 3 years ago, where they put a computer that they created called Watson on Jeopardy. They built Watson, they fed Watson every bit of Wikipedia, and it was still wanted more. So they kept feeding it information. And at first, Watson was kind of messing up. They actually had this on television. Alex Trebek is asking questions. The guy on the left has won the most money in the history of Jeopardy. The guy on the right had actually won the most games in history on Jeopardy. And then there's Watson. And if you go back, some of the videos are on YouTube because it's hilarious to see Watson say, "I'll take chicks dig me for 500." And that really was one of the categories. But Watson eviscerated these guys. He ended up winning, the machine ended up winning over $1 million. It was cool yet terrifying. Made me think of the old movie 2001: A Space Odyssey and HAL and taking over everything. That's the reality of where we are. The infinite computing, this is Watson, this is a picture of it. Had 2,880 Power 7 processor cores, which some of you know what that is and care, some of you don't. 16 terabytes of RAM, 200 million pages of content just stored in the machine. And it processed, when it would ingest data, it processed 1 million books a second. So the big question was, where's Watson now? Because Jeopardy's over. Well, IBM did something kind of cool. They stuck Watson in the cloud. And they've been feeding it medical texts. And now Watson is actually giving distance diagnosis to underserved countries like Africa and some of the third world. Pretty cool application for a machine. But wait, there's more. This is the guy I was telling you about, Steve Sasson. That's the first digital camera. It weighed about 3.75 pounds. It was 0.01 megapixels, okay? You could kind of see a shadow. And it cost about $10,000. All right, that was 1976. In 2015, the digital camera in your phone cost about $10. 10 megapixels. It was 1 billion times better, 1,000 times better in resolution, and now they're fast approaching the clarity of insect eyes. Obviously, the goal is human eyes and what we see and the shades and lighting that we see. But just in that short amount of time, there's been an exponential change. How about a little bit more? In the Apollo spacecraft, early rocket navigation, the cost, I still think, is a little bit classified, weighed 50 pounds. It dealt with velocity and orientation and acceleration. If you watch Apollo 13, this is what drives the gimbals and all that stuff. Some of you know more about this than I do. Today, that's handled by 2 chips in your phone, a gyroscope and an accelerometer, total cost of $4. Everything that machine in the Apollo spacecraft did, that's in your phone. And we're moving more and more to molecular machines that are free and embedded. In 1981, if you wanted GPS in your car, you would have to pay about $119,000. And can you imagine having that on your dash? Yeah, it would be a talking point, let me tell you. Of course, some of those cars in the 70s had a dash that could take that. Today, the GPS receiver in your phone costs less than $5. Do you get the idea, folks? We've gone from linear to very exponential. Oh, there's always been change in the world, I know that. But the pace of change is probably more rapid now than it has been, at least in our short history. So, 3D printing is the thing that will hurt your head. How many of you have seen 3D printers? A few of you, okay. I have seen them, I've seen them in action. They're very, very cool. And the thing that is happening is you're basically making something out of nothing. And it prints something cool. Well, none of us are going to be printing these sculptures, but how about these applications? Look at the bottom left. You'll see a kid who is playing soccer. They actually printed the prosthetic on that kid's right leg so he could play a soccer game. There in the bottom middle, all of those clothes at the Consumer Electronics Show 2 years ago, they printed all of the clothing that the hosts and hostesses wore at that show. Can you imagine you get to the point, I don't have any shoes that match this dress. Let me print some. Because that's where we're going, folks. Guys, you're about to run out of closet space. Because when this happens, it's going to happen big. But up in the top right, they printed 10 3D houses in 24 hours for less than $5,000 each. Now you think about some of the effort we have with some of our mission trips, going and building houses and things like that. Now send a crew with a 3D printer and just print it and wait. Just sit there, you know, and have these things built for you with a printer, because it's happening. I don't want to live in it, and I don't want to be in it when a tornado comes, but it is a start. And in the middle at the top, this is pretty neat. In Norway, they're actually trying to build a bridge over a canal with a 3D printer. And if you look, the bridge is partially done. The printer is attached to a rail, and it's printing its way across the canal. It'll be interesting to see if it finishes, and no, I'm not going to be the first person. So, all of that said, and I've got like a few minutes, let me just bring this home. What are we doing? We're living in a world that is exponential. It is moving so fast. And what are we doing? As a church, what are we doing? This is the challenge I give to churches when I talk about this, because the reality is, and I don't know, it may not be true here, I'm not here all the time, so you have to ask yourself and answer this question yourself, but what I see typically is we're doing the same old linear stuff. We are. We are preserving and doing the same linear stuff. Part of that is fine. But here's the reality. I tend to look at it from the standpoint of some of the words of Jesus. And let me just show it to you out of Luke 16. Jesus tells this whole story about a shrewd manager. And this is one piece of it. The master commended the dishonest manager because he'd acted shrewdly, you know, very wise, very with it. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself, so that when it's gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Here's what's interesting, folks. I don't know how purposefully shrewd we're trying to act. Because I fear, and I've done this some myself, I fear that many of our congregations spend every day hoping that tomorrow will be yesterday. And it won't. We are in a world that is at a certain pace, and here's the reality. They're hearing things in a certain way. So for me, I have to ask the question, are we living out the Great Commission, or are we living out the Field of Dreams? Because the Great Commission says to go and to teach. Well, how can you teach if you don't speak the language? If we're talking linear and the world is speaking exponential, are we teaching, or are we just talking? Because the reality is, we've got to go after the world. That is our charge. Let me show you a couple of things and then we'll be done. Our struggle is, as I just said, we talk linear. The world hears exponential. Here are some of the positives. The world listens when we're relevant. They really do. I have talks with people all over the country. And I enjoy having some of these discussions, but there comes a point where I've got to say, hey, there is a reason why I live this way. But the reality is I'm not talking to them the same way I did 10 and 20 years ago. We're having a very different conversation. Is that bad? No. Because there are certain intangibles, there are certain things that to me are not going to change. The gospel needs no changes. Our approach to the world does, though, typically. I want to beg you, please don't hear what I'm not saying. Okay? I'm not saying, hey, we got to change the gospel. No. Gospel's perfect how it is. I absolutely 100% believe the same gospel today that I did back in the 70s. I wasn't coherent in the 60s, but the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. Here's the beautiful thing about the gospel. It is relevant regardless of time, regardless of region, regardless of wherever you are. It was relevant 2,000 years ago. It was relevant 50 years ago. It's relevant today. It will be relevant for as long as the world exists. But the reality is we've got to talk in a little bit different language today than we have. Paul got this. All you have to do is read Acts 17 with him walking through Athens. He got it. He didn't teach the same lessons he taught in Jerusalem. He didn't teach the same lessons he taught in Damascus. He taught a totally different lesson using a pagan poet. Paul got it. And don't be fooled by the great omission. And I'm just going to show this and then we'll wrap up. Everyone's familiar with the Great Commission, right? Go make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. You know this. You've seen it. There's a great omission that sometimes we don't realize is there. The great omission is Jesus left a couple of things blank. Go and teach. He didn't say how. This is the God of Leviticus, folks. He could have said, go and teach using flannel graph. Go and teach using workbooks. He did not. And here's the beauty of that. The beauty of it is that as long as we teach the gospel, we can speak in relevant terms to other people. We really can. But our challenge is that sometimes we feel like our exponential life happens outside this building. But we come back together and it's all linear. And again, please understand, I don't know what it's like here. I just visit every now and then. The beauty of tonight is I might as well be wearing Teflon because none of this is sticking to me. But the reality is most of the churches I see, people behave the same way. Outside life is outside life. In here is linear. And then we go out and we're living exponentially, and when we talk about Jesus, we talk in a very linear fashion. And we talk using terms that people don't get. People don't know what the tetragrammaton is. They don't know what propitiation is. But it's easy to have a conversation about Jesus because he's relevant regardless of time. So we are equipped to be shrewd. Jesus left a lot of the how we teach to us. It guarantees the gospel is going to remain relevant at any point in history without changing the message. And that's the beauty of it. I can talk to people about Jesus, about baptism, and I can do it in very exponential ways. And if you think I'm the only one talking about exponential, Jesus started the exponential movement. Who in the world would ever think you could change the world with 12 guys? That's exponential. It is. He didn't use a correspondence course. He used 12 guys, and one of them ditched him. So the reality is we can be very much exponential. And really the question is, are we going to make the choice to be exponential? Because it is a choice. So I invite you tonight to think this way, and then I'll close. Ask yourself, am I living exponentially in one part of my life and linear in another? Because it's a dualism that I don't think can be sustained. Make your entire Christian life be relevant in the world in which you live. That's what Jesus did. That's what the apostles did. That's what the early Christians did. It is okay. Teach the gospel because it needs no changes. But the method we do it in has got to be heard. And if we speak a language nobody's going to hear, the real question is, are we really living out the Great Commission? That's the question. I hope this is beneficial for you. What we're going to do is typically there might be some people who need prayers or who want to share some things with this church. What we're going to do right now is give you a moment as we sing a form of an invitation song. If you would like to come forward, if you'd like prayers, if you would like to join Jesus' exponential movement through baptism, we invite you to do that now while we stand and sing.